Hello everyone, thank you for being here. Hope you have a relaxing and comfortable time with Stories for Happy Life channel. Alexis Monroe adjusted her sunglasses as she stepped out of her car, her fingers gripping the strap of her worn leather bag. The Monroe Financial Trust branch in Chicago loomed before her, its glass doors reflecting the bustling street. It looked just as sleek and polished as it had the day she cut the ribbon at its grand opening 2 years ago. She had given a speech about trust, accessibility, and fairness that day. Now, she was here to see if those values truly existed inside her own bank. Dressed in a simple cardigan, jeans, and sneakers, she knew no one would recognize her. The CEO and founder of Monroe Financial Trust rarely appeared in the media. She had built her career behind the scenes, making smart investments and expanding the bank to over 50 locations nationwide. Lately, however, troubling rumors had reached her. Friends, colleagues, and even some customers had hinted at discriminatory practices happening within some branches, especially toward customers who didn't fit the mold. At first, she wanted to believe it was just an overreaction. After all, Monroe Financial had strict anti-discrimination policies and required diversity training for all employees. But policies meant nothing if they weren't enforced. So today, she was not Alexis Monroe, the powerful CEO. Today, she was just another customer, testing the system she had built. As she walked into the bank, the cool blast of air conditioning hit her. The scent of freshly printed money and sterile office furniture cleaner filled the lobby. She scanned the room, taking in the scene. A businessman in a tailored suit was chatting easily with a teller. A middle-aged woman in a floral dress was being helped at the desk with no hassle. Meanwhile, a younger black man in a hoodie sat waiting, his hands gripping a checkbook. His shoulders were tense, as if he had been sitting there for too long. Alexis approached the counter, where a young teller, Samantha Davis, was typing away at her computer. She was in her mid-20s, blonde hair pulled into a tight ponytail, expression blank as she barely acknowledged Alexis's presence. "Hi," Alexis said with a polite smile. "I'd like to make a withdrawal." Samantha didn't look up. Instead, she slid a clipboard across the counter. "Fill this out," she muttered, fingers still tapping at the keyboard. Alexis took the form and filled in the details. Name? Alexis Monroe. Account number? Confidential. Withdrawal amount? $5,000. She signed at the bottom and handed it back. That was when everything changed. Samantha's eyes flicked over the form, then to Alexis's ID. Her brows pulled together slightly and her lips pressed into a thin line. Something had shifted. She looked up, her gaze scanning Alexis' face with hesitation, as if something didn't quite add up. The transaction wasn't large enough to be unusual. And yet, doubt settled into the teller's expression. Alexis had seen this look before, but never directed at her. For a moment, she waited, giving Samantha the benefit of the doubt. But then, without saying a word, the teller picked up Alexis's ID and stood abruptly. I'll be right back," she said before disappearing into the manager's office behind the frosted glass door. Alexis stood there, her fingers tapping the counter lightly as the seconds dragged on. The businessman finished his transaction without issue. The middle-aged woman left smiling. But Alexis was still standing there, waiting. Waiting for an answer. Waiting for something that shouldn't even be happening. 5 minutes passed. Her jaw tightened as she glanced toward the manager's office. She already knew what was happening in there. This wasn't about banking policies. This was about who they thought she was, and she wasn't leaving until she got some answers. Alexis leaned against the counter, keeping her breathing steady. The uneasy silence in the lobby pressed down on her. She scanned the room again, noticing the small details. The man in a wrinkled suit, the one who looked like he had rushed straight from work, stepped up to the counter. The teller greeted him immediately. No hesitation, no second glance at his ID. The older woman in the floral dress was chatting easily with another teller. No extra security measures, no verification checks. Yet here Alexis stood, waiting for them to decide if she belonged. She let out a slow exhale as the frosted glass door finally swung open. The teller, Samantha, returned, but she wasn't alone. Following close behind her was a middle-aged man with a stocky build, rimless glasses, and an air of forced politeness. His name tag read, Todd Larson, branch manager. Alexis recognized him. She had personally signed off on his hiring budget 2 years ago. But Todd didn't recognize her. Todd approached the counter, offering a tight-lipped smile. The kind of smile designed to control a situation, not diffuse it. "Afternoon, ma'am," he said smoothly. "I understand you're trying to make a withdrawal?" Alexis nodded, keeping her voice calm. "That's right, $5,000. My account, my ID." Todd gave a slow nod, exaggerated, as if processing this information. Then he turned slightly to Samantha, who shifted uncomfortably beside him. "Mind if I take a quick look at your ID?" he asked, his tone deliberately too casual. Alexis inhaled sharply. "I already gave it to her," she said, her voice steady. Todd ignored the comment. He picked up her ID, held it up to the light, turned it over in his fingers, and studied it as if it were a fake. Then he looked up and asked, "Miss Monroe, is this your first time banking with us?" Her stomach dropped. It was such a simple question, innocent even, but the implication was clear. "Do you belong here?" Alexis kept her voice level. "I've banked here since this branch opened," she said. Todd nodded slowly again, like he was considering her words instead of simply accepting them as fact. "And you're withdrawing $5,000? He said, feigning casual interest. She fought the urge to clench her fists. "That's what I wrote down." Something about the lobby had shifted. It wasn't silent, but it was quieter. A few customers had glanced her way, noticing the change in energy. Todd set the ID down on the counter and asked the next question, the one that made her pulse spike. "And what do you do for work, Miss Monroe?" Her lips curled slightly just for a second. There it was, the moment where professionalism slipped just enough for the truth to show. She tilted her head, studying him the way he had been studying her. "I'm in finance," she said carefully. Todd narrowed his eyes just a fraction. "Oh," he said, "what kind?" Alexis let the silence stretch. Then finally she said, "Banking." Todd's smirk faltered. For the first time, a crack appeared in his confidence, but he recovered quickly. "I see," he said slowly. Then, without looking at her, he casually placed her ID back on the counter. "I'm afraid we won't be able to process this withdrawal at this time." Alexis blinked. She straightened. "Excuse me?" Todd clasped his hands together, playing the role of the reasonable authority figure. "We're unable to verify the transaction," he said, voice calm. A rush of heat spread through Alexis's chest. "You have my ID," she said. "You have my account number. What exactly needs verifying?" Todd kept his mask in place. "It's just a precaution," he said smoothly. "We take security very seriously." Alexis exhaled sharply through her nose. There it was, the word people used when they didn't want to say what they really meant. Security. Not policy. Not procedure. Not fairness. Just a polite way of saying, "You don't belong." Her fingers curled against her palms. This wasn't about fraud. It wasn't about banking policies. It was about something else entirely. She could have walked away. She could have let it slide. But Alexis Monroe had spent her entire career fighting for fairness in finance. She wasn't leaving now. She lifted her chin slightly, her voice sharpening just a notch. "Todd," she said, "let's be honest with each other." Todd hesitated. Alexis pressed on. "If I were a man in a tailored suit, would you be asking me these questions?" For just a split second, Todd flinched. A flicker of something crossed his face, too fast to catch. Then, just as quickly, he recovered. "This isn't about appearance," he said smoothly. "It's about policy." A humorless laugh escaped Alexis. "Is that right?" she murmured. Todd tilted his head slightly, pretending to consider his next words. Would you like to try using a different form of verification, he offered. Maybe a utility bill? A second form of ID? A utility bill. Alexis let out a slow breath. You want me to provide a second form of ID for my own bank account where you're currently holding my money? Todd didn't blink. I understand this can be frustrating, Miss Monroe, he said, his voice infuriatingly measured. But you'd be surprised how often fraudulent IDs come through. Alexis shook her head, her nails tapping against the counter. Okay, she said. Let's do this another way. She leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice just enough to make her point land. You have my name. You have my ID. You can check my file right now and see that I've been banking here since day one. You can also see that I approved the hiring budget for this branch. Todd visibly tensed, his lips pressed together. The teller shifted uncomfortably. Alexis tilted her head slightly, her voice dropping to a calm, quiet warning. You might want to check before you dig this hole any deeper. Todd's mask of control cracked just a little. For a brief moment, she thought he might cave, might backtrack, process the withdrawal, and let her leave quietly. Instead, he let out a short breath, as if reluctantly coming to a decision. And then, he made a mistake. A critical mistake. He reached beneath the counter and called security. Alexis barely had time to react before a uniformed security guard appeared from the back office. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his hand resting near his belt. His face was unreadable, but Alexis didn't need to guess what this looked like. A bank manager denying a customer service was one thing. Calling security? That was an escalation. This was a statement. It was a message. It was meant to remind her who had the power here. The lobby grew even quieter. A few customers pretended not to notice, shifting in their seats. Others watched openly, sensing the tension. Alexis let out a slow breath, forcing herself to remain calm. She had dealt with men like Todd before, the kind who didn't expect pushback, the kind who needed to remind people of their place. She wasn't playing into it. Todd gestured toward Alexis, looking at the security guard. We just want to ensure a smooth experience for all our customers, he said. His voice was calm, measured, as if she were the one causing a scene. Alexis lifted her chin slightly, her voice cool. A smooth experience? She repeated. She turned to the security guard. Are you here to help me access my money or just to escort me out? The guard hesitated. He glanced at Todd, who gave him a tight nod, a silent command. The message was clear. Get rid of her. Alexis let out a small laugh, shaking her head. Wow, she muttered. So this is what we're doing. Todd sighed dramatically, playing the victim, as if he was the one being inconvenienced. Miss Monroe, if you'd like to return with additional documentation, we'd be happy to assist you. But right now, we can't. Alexis cut him off. You know what's funny, Todd? She asked. Todd stiffened. I watched you process that man's transaction 10 minutes ago, she continued. No extra verification, no manager intervention, no security. She stepped closer to the counter, her voice dropping just enough. I wonder what's different about me. The shift was immediate. The teller looked down, avoiding eye contact. The security guard shifted on his feet, his stance suddenly less rigid. Todd, however, stood firm. I'm sorry you feel that way, Miss Monroe, he said, voice flat. But our policies are in place for a reason. Alexis exhaled slowly, pressing her palms against the counter. She had given them every opportunity to correct this. They hadn't. So now, she was about to make them regret it. She reached into her bag. Todd stiffened. The security guard's hand inched closer to his belt. Alexis didn't blink. She pulled out her phone. A few customers looked over, sensing something was happening. Todd's posture shifted. Miss Monroe, he started, voice suddenly cautious. Alexis pressed record. She angled the camera toward Todd, keeping her expression neutral. I just want to make sure I get this on record, she said smoothly. She turned the phone slightly toward the security guard. "You were called over for what reason exactly?" The guard hesitated. He glanced at Todd again, who looked like he wanted to sink into the floor. The tension in the room was thick now. And then Todd did something that sealed his fate. He reached out, not to grab her, not to push her phone away, but to snatch her ID off the counter, as if, despite everything, he still needed to have the last move. That was it. That was the moment Alexis smiled. Because Todd had no idea who he was dealing with. And in about 10 seconds, he was going to wish he'd handled this differently. She let the moment stretch, letting Todd feel the weight of his mistake. Then, in the calmest voice possible, she said, "Todd, let me introduce myself properly." His expression twitched, the first sign of real uncertainty. She plucked her ID from his grip, not forcefully but with deliberate ease. She flipped it over in her hand, tapping her finger against the name printed on it. "You see this?" she asked. "This isn't just any customer's ID." She let the pause sink in. Todd was frozen. "You're looking at the founder and CEO of Monroe Trust." The silence was instant. The security guard's posture shifted. The teller's face drained of color. Even the customers nearby who had been watching curiously suddenly stiffened. Todd. For the first time since this entire situation began, Todd lost control. His throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. His lips parted slightly as if forming a sentence, but no words came out. Alexis took a slow step back, sliding her ID into her bag. She folded her arms. "I built this bank," she continued, "from nothing. I signed the approval for this branch. I personally approved the hiring budget that got you this job." Todd's hands curled into fists. His entire demeanor had shifted. Gone was the forced politeness. What was left was pure panic. "And today," Alexis said, "I walked in as just another customer, just to see what would happen." She tilted her head slightly. "You know what happened, Todd?" He didn't answer. He couldn't. Alexis let her voice lower just a notch. "I was refused service. I was lied to. I was humiliated and treated like I didn't belong." Todd's mouth opened. "Miss Monroe?" Alexis held up a hand. "No," she said. "You had your chance to speak. Now you listen." She turned slightly, making sure everyone in the lobby could hear her next words. "If I was standing here in a tailored suit, if I were a man, if I looked like what you expect a CEO to look like," she let the sentence hang, "you and I wouldn't be having this conversation." Todd's eyes darted to the security guard as if looking for help. The guard said nothing. The teller? She was staring at the register, avoiding eye contact. Alexis took a slow breath, pulling her phone back up. "Todd, I have a question for you," she said. "Would you like me to send this footage directly to corporate, or should I just handle this myself?" Todd's face drained of color. His mouth opened and closed twice before he finally found his voice. "Miss Monroe, I sincerely apologize. This was just a misunderstanding?" Alexis finished for him. Todd nodded quickly. "Absolutely, I can process that withdrawal right away." Alexis let that sit in the air for a second. Then finally, she let out a soft laugh. "Todd," she shook her head. "You and I both know it's too late for that." Todd visibly paled, because he knew she was right, and what came next? That was up to her. Todd's face had lost every ounce of confidence. The smooth, polished manager who had dismissed her minutes ago now stood rigid, gripping the counter as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. The security guard, now shifting awkwardly, glancing between Todd and Alexis, uncertain where he stood in all this. The teller, still frozen, eyes glued to the register, wishing she could disappear. And the customers. Oh, they were no longer pretending not to listen. They were invested now. This was no longer just about a bank withdrawal. This was about power, and who actually had it. Alexis exhaled slowly, then tapped her fingernails against the marble counter. She let the sound fill the silence. Then she said in a calm, measured voice, "Todd, let me make sure I understand something." She tilted her head slightly. "Just a few minutes ago, my ID wasn't enough. My name wasn't enough. My account history wasn't enough." She took a slow step forward. "You needed more proof, more verification, more assurances." Todd swallowed hard. The tension in the room thickened. "And now that you know who I am." She let her eyes scan the room, landing on the security guard, the teller, and finally back to Todd. Suddenly, none of that matters anymore? Todd opened his mouth, paused, closed it again. He had no answer. Todd's Adam's apple bobbed. "Miss Monroe, I sincerely regret how this situation unfolded. I can assure you, this was not intentional." Alexis let out a short, humorless laugh. "Not intentional?" she repeated. Then she looked him dead in the eye. "Todd, do you think I'm stupid?" Todd visibly flinched. "You knew exactly what you were doing," she continued. "You looked at me and decided I wasn't supposed to be here. You put up every roadblock you could to make sure I knew it." Todd shook his head quickly. "Miss Monroe, I assure you that's not what happened." Alexis cut him off. "No." Her voice was like steel now. "I don't want to hear any more rehearsed apologies." She folded her arms. "Because let's be clear, Todd, you're not sorry for what you did. You're sorry you got caught." A thick silence settled over the lobby. The customers nearby weren't even pretending anymore. They were watching, listening, feeling the weight of every word. Alexis turned to the security guard. "You were called over to escort me out, correct?" The guard hesitated. Then slowly he gave a stiff nod. "Yes, ma'am. That was my understanding." Alexis nodded once. "And now that you know who I am, are you still under that impression?" The guard glanced at Todd, then back at her. He shifted his weight. "No, ma'am. I was just following instructions." Alexis studied him for a moment. She knew how this worked. Todd was going to throw everyone under the bus to save himself. She had no doubt that by tomorrow he'd be telling corporate it was the teller's fault, the security guard's fault, a misunderstanding. Not today. Not this time. Alexis reached into her bag and pulled out a business card. She slid it across the counter toward Todd. "Here's what's going to happen." Todd stared at it, his fingers trembling slightly as he picked it up. "You're going to call my office. You're going to schedule a meeting with corporate, and you're going to explain in detail why this happened today." Todd's throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. "Of course, Miss Monroe, absolutely." She turned to the security guard. "I appreciate you stepping in when called," she said evenly, "but I'd advise you to be more careful about which situations actually require your involvement. If a customer isn't being disruptive," she let her words sink in, "then the first step shouldn't be intimidation." The guard gave a small nod of understanding. "Understood, ma'am." Finally, Alexis turned to the teller. The young woman flinched as Alexis said her name. "You had my ID. You had my account information. And you still decided I wasn't worth listening to." The teller looked up for the first time, eyes wide. I was just following protocol, ma'am." Alexis let her words settle. Then she asked the question that made the teller's face drain of color. "Then maybe you need to ask yourself, why does protocol only seem to apply to people like me?" The teller swallowed hard. She looked away. Alexis took one last look around the branch. Every customer in the room was watching. Every employee had heard. This wasn't about a withdrawal anymore. This was about something bigger. Alexis turned toward the exit, but before she left, she paused at the door. She slowly turned back around, and in a voice that was steady, clear, and impossible to ignore, she said, "This is the last time something like this happens in my bank." Todd flinched. The teller shifted uncomfortably. The security guard lowered his gaze. Alexis continued, "I won't stand by while customers are treated differently because of assumptions, bias, or just plain ignorance." Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to, because everyone was listening. "There will be changes," she said simply. "Real ones." She let the silence settle. Then she glanced at Todd. "You might want to start looking for a new job." She didn't wait for a response. She turned and walked out the door. The moment Alexis Monroe walked out of that bank, the fallout began. By the time she reached her car, her phone was already buzzing. Corporate had seen the footage. The regional director, someone who had always respected Alexis, called within the hour. "Alexis, I just saw the video. We need to talk." She smirked to herself, sitting in the driver's seat. "Oh, don't worry," she said, calm and certain. "We will." By the next morning, an emergency leadership meeting was scheduled. Every branch manager was called in. Every customer service policy was reviewed. The CEO, her title now firmly re-established, sat at the head of the table, her presence commanding. She played the recorded footage from the bank branch on the big screen. Nobody spoke. Some winced, others glanced around, uneasy. The silence stretched until Alexis finally spoke. "This isn't a one-time mistake," she said. "This is a systemic failure." Her voice was sharp but controlled. "And I want to make one thing clear." She leaned forward, her eyes sweeping the room. "If this can happen to me, the CEO, then I can only imagine what happens to the customers who don't have the power to fight back." A few nervous throat clears echoed in the room. Nobody dared to argue, because they knew she was right. Alexis wasted no time. She implemented mandatory bias training across all branches. Not a one-time workshop, but an ongoing accountability program. A new customer service initiative was launched, designed to ensure that no one, regardless of their appearance, background, or perceived status, would be treated as an outsider in their own bank. She introduced anonymous customer feedback reporting, encouraging clients to share their experiences, good or bad, without fear of being ignored. Employees who failed to meet the bank's updated inclusivity standards? Gone. It didn't take long for the culture to shift. Customers, especially those who had been ignored or brushed off in the past, began to notice the difference. Trust was being rebuilt. And Alexis? She knew this was just the beginning. And Todd? He didn't last a week. By the end of the emergency meeting, Alexis made it clear. There is no place in this company for someone who decides which customers deserve basic respect. HR took over from there. By Friday, Todd was gone. When word got out about why, no one was surprised. The young teller, however, she wasn't fired. Instead, Alexis called her into a one-on-one meeting. She didn't go in there to scold her. She went in there to teach her. "You followed Todd's lead," Alexis said, looking her in the eye. "But I need to know. Do you understand why what happened was wrong?" The teller, nervous, fidgeting, nodded quickly. "Yes, ma'am. I do. And I want to do better." Alexis studied her for a moment. Then she slid a training manual across the desk. "Then here's your chance." The teller took the opportunity seriously. She became one of the strongest advocates for Alexis's new customer service policies. Because sometimes, accountability isn't just about punishment, it's about growth. 2 months later, Alexis returned to that same branch. No cameras, no formal announcements, just her as a customer. This time, the moment she walked in, she was greeted immediately. A young teller, not the same one from before, but someone new, smiled warmly. "Good afternoon, ma'am. How can we help you today?" She stepped forward, placed her ID on the counter, and said, "I'd like to make a withdrawal." The teller checked her ID, typed in her account number, and smiled again. "Of course, Miss Monroe. How much would you like?" And just like that, Alexis knew. The culture had changed, because she refused to accept anything less. This wasn't just about one bad experience at a bank. This was about something deeper. It was about who gets challenged and who gets trusted. It was about how institutions treat people, not just in policies, but in real, everyday interactions. And most of all, it was about what happens when you stop letting it slide. Alexis's final words. In a final company-wide statement, Alexis addressed her employees. "We are in the business of trust. That trust doesn't come from policies written on paper. It comes from how we treat people every single day." She let the words settle. "If I ever hear of another customer being treated the way I was treated," her eyes swept the room, "you won't just be losing their business. You'll be losing your job." Silence. Then, a slow, respectful nod from every manager in the room. They understood. She meant every word. Alexis Monroe knew one thing for certain. Change doesn't happen just because you hope for it. It happens when you demand it. And on that day, standing in that bank, she made sure of it. Because sometimes the only way to fix a broken system is to break the cycle yourself. What is the lesson of this story? 1. Assumptions can lead to costly mistakes. The bank employees assumed Alexis didn't belong, without ever verifying facts. Never judge someone based on appearance alone. You never know who they really are. 2. Bias exists everywhere, even in systems meant to be fair. Alexis built her bank on fairness, but even her own institution failed when it mattered most. This shows that policies alone don't stop discrimination. Real change requires accountability. 3. Power is in speaking up, not staying silent. Many people experience discrimination but don't push back. Alexis didn't just fight for herself, she used her position to change the system, ensuring no one else had to face the same injustice. 4. Respect shouldn't depend on status. When the employees thought Alexis was just another customer, they dismissed her. But the moment they learned she was the CEO, their behavior changed. Respect should be given to everyone, not just those in power. 5. Change happens when you demand it. Instead of accepting an apology, Alexis implemented new policies, training, and consequences to make sure her bank actually lived up to its values. Change doesn't happen by chance. It happens when people refuse to accept the way things are. What do you think about this story? Let's comment below to discuss them, Beth. And don't forget to subscribe our channel to listen to more interesting stories.